Michael, our sincere apologies for the delay. We have been in the thick of it on a number of different bills, but we're so glad that you're able to join us.
Hello.
Uh,
Apologies.
did you did you hear our apology?
I think I missed it because I didn't know when I come on and I was
All right,
distracted.
so
Thank you.
uh, my apology for the delay.
No problem. No problem.
We have been in the thick of a different bill. As you know, this is that time of year, but we're shifting gears now to look at school construction. And one of our colleagues on the committee thought it would be particularly helpful to hear from all of you. You in particular on, again, H 871. We probably have about 15 or so minutes. I don't know if you can keep it high level for about 10 minutes, and then we'll ask some questions as we go
Yeah,
along.
sounds great. So for the record, I'm Michael Gahn, the Executive Director of the Vermont Bond Bank. Thank you so much for having me. I did send some materials. I don't know if they made their
We
way
do
to.
have them, and they're printed out right in front of us.
Okay, terrific. So
Sure.
I'm really just going to speak to, I think, I've met most of you. The bond bank, just as way of introduction, is 100% aligned with, or our history is that of school facilities in Vermont. Our reason for being formed in the late 60s was because of school construction, and fast forward a little over 50 years, all the schools we help finance are now at the end of their useful life. So we're very invested in this issue and its solutions. So on page three, I was very happy to see H 71 incorporate many things that were a priority to us. I think, a few folks there were members of the task force that worked throughout the summer and fall, and I think that we have a great structure through that effort to think about how aid can be released to school districts without sort of hurting the state's credit rating. But I think the bottom line there for all of you to be aware of is that if we can leverage the state's credit rating through the bond bank, we can in fact leverage the state's credit rating. We can probably take on more debt at the bond bank than can, well, absolutely the bond bank can take on more school construction debt than can the state. And so preserving the state's rating is kind of the key piece to all this to keep costs low. So our rating is a derivative of the state, but the debt that we issue doesn't impact the state directly. And we've done a lot of work since 2020 to make sure that the state is insulated from the amount of debt that we issue. So I just know that as a founding concept. Um, One of the points here, second on the list, schools are social infrastructure with and without students. Again, very pleased to see this concept incorporated. Housing and social infrastructure are brought out directly in the in H 71, and we couldn't be happier about that because I think when you make it a zero-sum game in the event of consolidation or moving facilities around, that's the only piece of social infrastructure in that community, and ultimately that's a kind of a death sentence for a bond vote. Um, I think I've covered the main sources. I guess for all of you to be aware of, the task force members know this, but we are actively pursuing as many low-cost sources of financing as we can. The IIJA was very helpful from a hard infrastructure perspective, the bipartisan infrastructure law, but was not particularly helpful for facilities. So the question is like how we shoehorn in those sources, and the main one we're looking at is dollars related to the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Major awardees were announced last week from EPA. One of our partners, Climate United, received a $7 billion grant, and they will be looking to do K through 12 school renovation for energy efficiency purposes, and are devoting uh, somewhere between 300 million and 500 million to that effort. So long story short, as you think through the criteria in the future, I think it's important to optimize capital where appropriate. So rather than giving aid for things like energy efficiency, although it's really important, optimizing sources so that we can do that on a low cost basis, and directing the aid towards things that are not otherwise funded is important. So that's all on background. And what I did want to spend a few minutes about is actually on page 4. And the rest of the deck really is background for you on both the history of school construction, which we see because because we finance so many of the transactions historically, other than Winooski School District in Burlington, we've financed basically everything in the state over the last 50 years. And then we have some background for you there on different methods of credit enhancement and equitable access to financing. And the sort of punchline and the good news is that because of the bond bank, a lot of the problems that other states would have in thinking about solutions to this problem, you don't have to worry about. But specifically as it relates to H7-1 and also thinking about all that's transpired in education finance this past year, we at the bond bank and in my own personal background is varied in different types of finance, and we're aware of other methods of finance and project delivery that exist, throughout the country. And so I think really, as I read through the language, and I haven't looked at it in a few months, but as I looked at it again yesterday and thought about it in the context of how much construction we need to undertake and the pressures that are facing the ed fund and schools generally, I think it really suggests an approach that is as creative as possible and doesn't close the door on anything that might be helpful. So for that reason, I would suggest, I think H7-1 is great generally, but I would suggest a couple additions. So I think on section 3, the pre-qualified architecture and engineering consultants, I think the subtext of this provision is really that new school construction will follow a very conventional process of design, bid, build. And much like VTrans has, there are other methods of project delivery, design, build, and then a whole host of other types of mechanisms. And so while I don't necessarily know whether or not that's the right answer for Vermont, as we sort of set the conditions of school construction for the future under this bill, I think we should provide the resources to explore all options. So I would suggest adding to the pre-qualifications also alternative project delivery consultants that have expertise in design, build, operate, maintain structures that can be used for physical and social infrastructure. And this is a method of procurement that VTrans, like I mentioned before, has explored extensively, from what I can tell, and in fact is using for their EV charging network that they've just sent out an RFP for. So it's not completely outside the box in the Vermont context. And then going down to the efficiency section, I think the whole idea here is to gain efficiencies from a potential alternative project delivery methodology. And so I would suggest adding to the cost containment strategy, not just templates for new construction, but thinking around, again, alternative project delivery and consideration of various risk transfer strategies that may be public to public private partnerships, or maybe public to private partnerships that can help alleviate some of the risk involved in new construction. So that's kind of my punchline.
That's very helpful. I'm just looking for the committee to respond to those questions, concerns, any opposition to making those edits.
I don't. So
Okay.
how does Michael feel about being part of the group?
Do you hear that question, Senator?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to do so. I think as it develops, I'll probably seek out ways to comment one way or the other. So I'm happy to be included.
Do you have a follow-up, Senator Kulik?
No.
Okay.
So to an earlier point, perhaps the treasurer and the bond bank as part of the reference group. I mean, it's just a reference group. It's consulted group.
A consultant.
Consulted.
But then it says at the bottom of the list, anyone could be.
Yeah, right. But financing is very relevant.
So consulting with the bond bank and the treasurer's office.
So the bond bank, where in the state government hierarchy is the bond bank? Who do you,
We are your child. So we're an instrumentality of the state, created by the General Assembly, and our board is appointed by the governor, and the treasurer sits ex officio on it.
So to actually just, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Please
was
go
gonna say we have our own contracts though, which is why our debt is separate from that of the states.
Any questions or concerns with adding the language put forward by Michael, how do I pronounce your last name so I don't mispronounce it?
Gone, just like G-O-N-E.
Got it. From Mr. Gahn, or the two suggestions or the suggestion put forward by Senator Weeks to add the Vermont Bond Bank and the Treasurer's Office to the groups to be consulted. Okay, great. Any other, Mr. Gahn, anything else you'd like to highlight or add?
No, I
Give
just
a number of things to review.
Yeah, I know you all are focused on a lot of really difficult issues, but would just advocate for continuing to stay focused on this issue. It's it's a huge unmet liability for us, and I think not to be ignored is that the school facilities issue crosses over to many state goals, such as population growth, attraction of people, and various other things. That I think can get lost in the weeds in terms of focusing on the dollars and cents. But we can't attract new people, younger people, unless we have places to send kids that are high quality.
Yeah.
if I could, Michael, are you willing to share like your impressions of the governors or the executive branch's appetite for potential future bonding to support school construction? I mean, it's kind of a wordy question, but I think you kind of get the idea. Is there an appetite to engage bonding for?
Yeah, I don't know what they're thinking. I sit on the Capital Debt Affordability Committee. In our last recommendation that was presented to the legislature, the overall debt amount was lower than the previous biennium. So we'll again consider that probably late fall, I think. And so then that might take into consideration. There's a number of metrics that are looked at that time. It's kind of a punt. I don't know is I guess the short answer. Yeah.
No, I would say that. Oh, this would be easy.
I think the general concept that's really important for us is that we benefit from the state's rating. We can issue more debt for school construction than can the state without rating consequence. So keeping the state's rating as high as possible allows us to do our work at the lowest cost, and we have the ability to leverage this, to literally leverage the state's rating several times what the state could directly.
Great. Anything else?
Thank you.
Mr. Gahn, thanks a million. Appreciate your patience with us.
No problem. Thank you for all the work you do. Take care.
All right, thank you. So committee, so we'll ask Beth to make those edits. Anybody want to hear from anybody else on this, or I think we're in pretty good shape to move it, look at again, but move it Friday.
You're talking about school construction.
School construction. Ready? Okay, everybody's good? Okay, great. Ask Beth to make those edits. And then as soon as Mr. Representative Conlon comes down, the last part of our day is just to have a conversation with Representative Conlon. He might bring Rep. Brady as well. They have some ideas for a education blueprint. We're just gonna get the sort of their overarching thoughts. So we're not completely surprised when we see the final language, but to Ms. St. James, oh,
There it
perfect
is.
timing. Oh, really great. And Representative Brady, and I just said that he may be joining us.
Yeah.
Let's give the good chair to Representative Brady.
Let's be real here.
And Peter, you can sit wherever you.
Just goes every day.
Thank you, Watson.
Right.
Oh, I'm not that.
Yeah.
All right.
Great timing. We just finished looking at school construction.
Oh,
Prior to that, a little bit on BOCES. What we settled on now for the last bit of our day is we're not going to go into language. But we would love to know what you're all thinking, some of your ideas generally
Yep.
about what we're keep referring to as the education blueprint. And this we know is in the yield bill.
Yep.
We're gonna likely have a joint hearing at some point with Senate Finance.
Okay.
We know what's really in it,
Great.
but we know it has a number of stops before it
Yep.
begins. So tell us about what you're thinking.
although it's made it further, it's now straw pulled out of us and made it through House Ways and Means, so it's
Right.
headed to appropriations and then we'll be on the calendar Tuesday.
Great.
Or, yeah, be up for
So it is
Action
on the Ways and Means website
Yep.
for today, first.
version 10.
But even before we get into language, just
Sure.
give us your big overarching thoughts on what you're trying to do, the problem you're trying to fix.
The problem we're trying to fix is everything. So, the work that happened in our committee that's now folded into this and got there were some changes by Ways and Means, was really, our sort of not at any means perfect, but best stab at everything we've been hearing and taking a lot of testimony on since mid to late January in terms of kind of where we sit in a sort of crisis / inflection point in education right now, knowing, from the December 1 letter, knowing kind of the budget forecast had high property tax increases and, sort of, I would say, elevated public rhetoric around kind of why is it, what's going on, how do we get our arms around this, where are we going? And so we've taken a lot of testimony. We had a couple of long joint sessions with Ways and Means to try to be more collaborative along the way, to really try to keep things from just being siloed in terms of finance and education, and hearing again and again from the field that, we're using a lot of sort of finance tools, and that's often been the easiest thing at the disposal of the legislature. And that doesn't necessarily drive educational policy or outcomes as clearly as we might want it to. And so, hearing from administrators, school board members, the Chamber of Commerce, we had a joint hearing where we heard from over 20 House members from both sides of the aisle, from all parts of the state, sort of what is happening in your communities, what are you hearing, what are the concerns, and what are sort of the hopes for where we're going. And I think we were very stuck. I think all of us probably are, between the go fast, we have to do something now. And we continue to see budgets fail. We have huge challenges ahead of us right now. We have a whole bunch of schools that still do not have a budget for next year.
And I'm trying to interpret.
Yeah.
But were you thinking really cost containments when you put together the blueprint, or
If I can interrupt, I would just say that, what we heard over and over again is if we're gonna make hard decisions and, go to the areas that we know are hard to talk about, because that's all we got left. We need a vision. We need to have a direction where we're all in the boat rowing together, because it's a lot easier to get people on board for some of the harder conversations if we all know there's an end point that's gonna make our system better, more efficient, and responsible to taxpayers.
And to that, I think, we heard in terms of what are the cost drivers, there are some newer and more acute cost drivers this year or in the last couple of years. The ending of federal funds despite extraordinary student needs in schools. The teacher contracts that were negotiated during a really challenging time in schools of high inflation and a lot of turnover in the field. The increasing, as you were just talking about, facilities needs in our schools that have accumulated, As well as longstanding, we have a very big system for a small state and small number of students. We have a lot of buildings. It's very decentralized. And that does not lend itself to efficiency and economies of scale. So sort of the combination of short-term and long-term cost drivers
And outcomes.
and outcomes, led us again and again, and hearing from the field, that the real solutions here aren't quick. As much as we all, from a public, taxpayer perspective, certainly want to be able to flip some switches fast, that is not necessarily going to get us anywhere in the long run. And we're maybe at a point more than ever, and I would say what was really compelling is what we heard in committee a lot, is more people kind of saying the hard things, saying, we need help. We know in some communities, we're operating too many buildings and we need to consolidate a couple of elementaries. But when left to local voters, that's the heart of their community. These are their kids. It's a long history and tradition. The will of the voters doesn't always align with the educational outcomes we might be seeking or the fiscal capacity we have as a state. So, and that's only one example. It's not just about small schools, but again and again, we heard the sort of, we want more oversight, we want more sort of direction from Montpelier and a little less local control, because we actually feel like we have less local control than perhaps the sort of apology of Vermont is. And state decisions and mandates have also trickled down in our own budgets, and they can't control those. And so, that compounding frustration of feeling like so much of what's in our budgets is out of our control. And yet we're trying to write fiscally, sound budgets and sell them to the public. So it was really, again, like months of testimony, a very, very, I think we continue to struggle with do something now and do the right things well to really lead us in a better direction for the future of education in this state in a more coherent way. And out of perhaps crisis is an opportunity to do that. And we've heard that phrase many, many times.
And,
Go on, Sarah, go ahead and jump in if you want a question or.
I was just gonna make some comments, so I can
Yeah.
wait till I'm
Okay.
and
represented.
then I was gonna say, is that sort of another example, and it's in there, it's like, what is the role of the agency of education? It's largely a compliance agency. And when we talk about gaining efficiencies, Act 173, the special education bill that became an act and everybody liked it, but it was really predicated on professional development in our schools to bend the cost curve on special education. And, that's a role really of the agency of education. Do we have an agency of education with the capacity to take on those initiatives that are really meant to gain efficiencies and bend the cost curve?
So one of the things we'd love you to also do, again, not digging into it, but
Mhm.
just tell us how you approach this, how, big picture, how, what have you put on the table that will likely come our way?
So we put it all on the whiteboard first. Sort of, with the committee, we said, okay, what is everything that we've heard?
Yeah.
What do we want to put in here? I will say we were not thrilled about sort of creating a task force,
Mhm.
but what we really said was we need to put a lot of really smart people who are deep thinking about this issue together in a room and give us the vision that we need. So that's sort of how we approached it.
Okay, so we're gonna get a task force.
Yes.
Basically concept that
Yeah.
we're gonna respond.
And
Any questions? I'm just looking. Should we let them keep talking or do you wanna somebody jump?
I can wait.
Okay,
I'm just
Yeah.
curious about the task force. This is a different task force than the school construction task force.
Yes.
And this would be the
It
vehicle,
almost had a couple other task forces in it, so we cut them back.
but the vehicle to do this is just via the budget that.
the yield.
It's the yield bill,
Yield.
yield bill,
Yield.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, so the school construction task force is strictly legislative to come out with, a bill. This we try to keep as non-legislative as possible.
Gotcha.
So yeah, this commission, we went about it as a committee of first, what is it that what are the outcomes that we want from it? What are the charges of the committee? And then what perspectives do we want on it? We kind of worked backwards, sort of backwards design. So the charges that we defined in House Education of kind of what are the bigger buckets of what we've been hearing for months. in terms of our input in committee that are the challenges and opportunities ahead. And so the four big buckets that you'll see are, one is the first charge is related to governance. Exact wording, governance, resources, and administration. Like, how is our system currently governed? What is the interplay between the State Board of Education and the Agency of Education? And we actually know some of this work was really happening when COVID really disrupted everything. Like, you know, Dan French, former Secretary French, and Tammy Colby have been working on some of that, and I think it really got sidelined by COVID. But where does the sort of, where should some of the decision making lie? What kind of resources are needed to Chair Collins' point that at an agency of education, if we're sort of reimagining our system and seeing a little bit more coherence across the state, is that going to be driven by support, technical assistance, and accountability from the agency of education? What kind of staff would that need? So that's the first section, is kind of the administration oversight governance part of it. The second major kind of bucket or charge that we created in the commission, again, based on a lot of feedback, is what's the physical size and footprint of our system? And we see a lot of overlap, hopefully, here to what's happening in school construction. But in the commission, you know, we specifically call out a closer look at how many buildings we operate. You know, how does the town tuition program fit within our, within our system, and how we disperse dollars and look for its efficiencies.
The impact of the number of buildings that we operate and the ability to staff them sufficiently.
Because again, that what we were finding in a lot of testimony was that in some ways, some of our perhaps being overstaffed as a state in education is partially just the number of buildings. You know, every building has to have a certain number of people in it, and we lose efficiencies in that way. The role of therapeutic schools, where they fit in our system, those are some really high expensive and drivers in our budget, particularly in our ed fund this year, some out of district placements for this therapeutic. So that sort of size, physical footprint of the system was bucket number two. Bucket number three is really, what is the role of schools today in 2024 and beyond, in a post-pandemic world, in a world where kids have a lot of social and emotional needs that perhaps we don't fully even understand kind of why and how. And so we're asking, you know, the commission to look at what is the role of schools in delivering services. And we see a real connection here to the community schools. If we're talking about, and I think both of our committees are, you know, is a model where schools might be the place that some social services or sort of basic needs are met. How are we going to resource our system for that? Are those ed fund things? Are those other programs that the state might run or pay for, but could be co-located in schools in order to be more efficient? So what is that real kind of role of schools as we look towards the future? And then finally, the fourth bucket, of course, is then how do we fund it? And what we heard again and again and asked almost every witness all session was, you know, how would you sequence the work? And we kept hearing, figure out the policy, figure out the vision and the system of where we're going, and then how do we fund it? Unfortunately, we can't freeze time, and we have to keep funding things in the meantime, so that's challenging. But the fourth bucket here, and this is where the Ways and Means Committee made quite a few, I think, strong changes, is to the ed fund, and how are we going to use the ed fund? What belongs in there and what perhaps doesn't belong in the education fund that's paid by property taxes? How are we going to continue to implement the weighting and the work that's been done there, and to continue to look at that over time? And there are some specific sort of deliverables, including coming back to us as a body next year with short-term cost containment considerations that a 2025 legislature could even put in place as we continue on the path. And I'm happy to walk through the deadlines then, and hopefully a grander kind of plan and specific policy recommendations from the commission about where is it that we're going, that's going to be, right sized for the population we have, that's going to support all students and make more sustainable and efficient use of our education fund dollars. And I can't remember if it's the words in here or not, but also hopefully, you know, some stability in the education fund and kind of what communities are going through now with revotes. is so destabilizing to schools and communities that how do we move to something that's far more stable so we aren't in such upheaval?
Just tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about timing of the
Yeah.
full report, when, because that's
Yeah.
a lot,
It is.
it's a lot.
It's a lot. So the general framework here is, it's effective on passage, and then I can come back to the question about membership. It's effective on passage. The commission is, within the commission, it's led by a steering committee of 5. That is, 3 of the steering committee members are decided with the speaker and the pro tem, and 2 are decided by the governor's office. That was a structure we borrowed from the select committee on higher education. We borrowed a few structures there because that seemed to be a pretty high functioning process that the legislature had done. So the steering committee within the commission really is the kind of leading group in this work. They deliver a work plan by next September so that we see kind of how they're envisioning the work. We get a preliminary look at their findings by next January. And then the final December, January, let's double check, and then the final report of all the recommendations comes back to the legislature in December 2025. And within that is a requirement for a pretty robust public engagement process, that this is, this isn't just a committee that sits in a room in Montpelier, but that there are at least 10 meetings and opportunities for input in different geographic areas of the state, and that there's
We did that with
Yeah.
the Act 250.
trying to borrow some processes from some other large systems work that have been done.
Center weeks.
Membership?
Nope.
No?
I think we're closed for questions, so I think.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have lost a little bit of my steam, but I think I can bring some of it back, which was just to say, I've been hoping for something like this for a long time, so I'm really glad that you all done this work. Being on a school board, the thought of trying to run a district without a strategic plan is, I can't even fathom it. So, and there may be a strategic plan that sits somewhere in the AOE, but it's not one that we all live by any means. So I'm looking forward to, mission, vision, clarity, strategic plan that can sort of exist regardless of what happens with the ins and outs of politics and the legislature. Because we are looking at a $2.6 billion budget, and we are looking at generations of Vermonters into the future. So it's such an important work, and I've struggled sitting in this chair trying to decide, like, with PCBs.
Yeah.
Do we spend $2 million to remediate the PCBs in this wing when we know we want to tear that down in a couple of years? I mean, things like that where it just didn't make sense, it just wasn't logical. So I'm hoping this adds a level of logic and structure to the work that we do. And so I just want to say thank you.
When was the last time a blueprint was produced in education?
There is interestingly some processes that Beth discovered that the state board is supposed to do in terms of what was it? Yeah, and what's it called? And we found it
Somebody
on
emailed one to us from 1971.
there was one a few years ago, but it was like a page.
Beth, may I?
Yeah,
Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Section 164A, Title 16, which is in the state board chapter, requires state board to adopt through a public process a statewide strategic education plan to describe how the agency will help school boards to improve student performance. That plan needs to be updated at least every 5 years. And the goals of the plan shall be to strengthen coherence and consistency among state and local education goals, standards for student performance assessments, professional development, opportunities and action plans, and to provide support for local curriculum development. The plan shall include information as to the economic costs of the implementation and the education benefits to be derived. So that law has been on the books. It was added in 1997. I don't know if there was a precursor to it. Added in Act 16.
Then as best we could tell, the last version of that was pretty thin.
Okay.
To non-existent, I'd have to pull up the specifics to,
To say nothing of it being news to most of us.
right, that we didn't even know that was happening, yeah.
that was a great overview. in a heads up in terms of what we're going to be seeing, and you expect the yield bill to be on the floor Tuesday. I think what we're hearing in the hallway is that Probst has a lot of amendments. So you're a Probst.
Yep.
So we don't wanna jump into it
Yep.
too fast, and then the question is, what happens on the floor? So
Yep.
it seems like we'll jump into the final bill sometime.
We appreciate you sort of, I know it's out of, process to.
Yeah, we
look at it,
appreciate
But the fact that you're
Giving
Because we know
us
you're
early
about to-
heads up.
head on a major
Yeah.
distraction.
Yeah.
Well, our morning committees, as you know, are about to wrap
Yeah,
up sooner,
yeah.
and that means we won't be in here very long because the afternoons will be crunched.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, please go ahead.
Might you be able to give us an update on what's happening with the literacy bill at all?
We are scheduling testimony.
Okay.
There are parts of it that just seem like no question. And then there are parts of it that we probably gonna have to tinker with a little bit.
Get testimony.
Yeah. Ceremonies.
Up to 284.
It's 284 cell phones. We were just talking about that. So this yield bill stuff.
Yeah.
And we're now gonna
This
start
consumed
turning,
us, yeah.
Travel.
This is consumed. us.
we're gonna start turning our attention to what do we do about districts that can't pass school budgets? So they're kind of on the front burner.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. As we talked about, it's like, that bill's fine, but we don't have the bandwidth to take on the bigger thing, but maybe the route we need to go is much bigger than just gathering policies and saying, let's just do it.
Back out.
Let's just fail.
Chapter.
Did you take a look at the original bill?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, we've gotten some testimony. I think if we have time, we'll, continue to get testimony. The committee's, I think, becoming
Pretty compelling testimony.
more interested in it. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, it's our sort of ability to do
That
it.
statute.
Probably.
I just got some testimony on email.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw
saw that,
public
yeah.
out in high school, yeah.
Yep.
So the
Yeah.
yield bill will continue regardless of the schools not passing their budgets, correct? And that's just part of the.
Yeah.
Well, he's setting it for next year.
Yeah, but we are, in pretty uncharted waters in terms of the amount of instability.
How many schools?
We now have,
Let's say
you
yesterday.
see,
all-
only 2 passed in the
Only 2
revotes
passed,
yesterday.
yeah.
There were about
6 or 8.
12 or so
Yes.
revotes yesterday.
Yeah.
There are several that are still coming up in early May, so, yeah, but and when you see the whole yield, the yield bill, the whole package, well, I'm not sure exactly what our host appropriations will do. There's only 100,000 in here in terms of sort of the work for all of this organization, so it's not a big amount of money, and not sure what else they will do, but the yield bill itself is more than your average yield bill in any given year, and it went through a lot of revision in the last 72 hours or so, but just in setting the yield, our Ways and Means Committee, and I think in coordination with Finance Committee, has done more in terms of some things around ballot language, some things around excess spending, as we look a year further ahead, there's more substantial policy and potential kind of roadmap around some of our school finance in this yield bill, so, I would say, I'm sure it's gonna go through some changes by the time it gets to your side, but I think a pretty, robust, more detailed, it's our attempt at answering the moment and realizing probably we can't possibly answer it enough for the reality on the ground of failed budgets and what tax rates are, and,
Saying to the governor this morning on the
Yeah.
radio, he was asked, well.
Yeah.
Short of that deferred idea that the treasurer kind
Yeah.
of called water on, what should happen? And he said, well. We just need to be more creative, which just sort of speaks to the struggle of how do you answer this quickly, other than throwing money at it.
When you all feel.
Yeah.
You're talking about the folks and your colleagues, that your language, that section 1 is pretty well baked, we are,
Yep.
so, we have Secretary Saunders next week.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have very abbreviated
Yes.
week. And then we see the end, so, and this is a heavy lift,
yes,
so.
Yeah.
Let us know,
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
jump in sooner rather.
sure, and I would add from our committee process for House Education.
Yeah.
We worked really hard. We kind of locked ourselves in last Thursday and Friday and said, just the committee, we are gonna work out we had some hard conversations. We reached some real compromise.
Yeah.
On both sides of the aisle, and then ultimately we straw polled it again today after Ways and Means had changed our language. And it was, 11-1-0 out of, House Education, so there's, a lot of consensus, even if everybody doesn't love it, about taking the themes we've heard and putting forth the best process we can, for, again, a more strategic, coherent, sustainable path ahead.
And I just wanna say, I mean, you guys worked on it for months.
Yes.
We have a week. So, no promises.
Yes,
We
yes.
will do our best.
Yes.
I know,
And so as soon as it's
as soon as you
baked,
have it,
I'll let you know.
Yeah.
we will.
We'll
do our best.
I'll say we voted out 120 today, we're gonna vote out 191 tomorrow.
What's 191?
That's the New Americans.
Grant.
Okay.
I think they were both Senator.
Literacy, and libraries is upstairs. And
Yeah.
committee
No, it's not, it's just next door.
next door, and then, cell phones is with you.
Yeah, and some miscellaneous that they'll throw together. But it's-
Yeah, we're waiting on the administration.
Oh, and
to give
CTV.
us testimony, we've been trying to get testimony, but
Yeah.
I know
I
they're
know we all,
busy with the,
I know we all wanna go, I would be
Process, yeah.
interested, I could go and watch your
Yeah.
tapes of your committee
Yeah.
meetings, but I'm just wondering what people didn't like about the bill,
Which one?
generally speaking. The,
about the commission.
yeah,
I think our most, our challenges were really honing in on what are the charges, like what are sort of the, buckets
The
of work
buckets.
here. And so that really took, I think, a lot of discussion and some of the, specificity. I mean, I think that we're talking about some challenging stuff here, the size of our system, the number of buildings. I think that's putting it out there, things that we know are gonna be challenging. And then not surprisingly, the membership of the commission.
Anytime we make a list.
And, yeah,
It's-
and the Ways and Means Committee ended up, we were really trying to stay small. We said small, lean, directed. It has grown in size in compromise with the Ways and Means Committee, and there are now 21 members on the commission. We were trying really hard to stay under 15.
How many Bs do you
It
have?
has grown a bit. And so essentially, there is some representation from all of the Bs, from the tax commissioner, from the Independent School Association. There are 5 legislators on it now. We had originally proposed no legislators. So, that this is I would say right now, the membership of the commission is a compromise between education and Ways and Means, but it definitely got larger and we have. And
We'll
tried
leave it
to,
there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
thank
Thanks.
you.
Okay, committee, I think, Morgan, we can